Thank you, Paul, and thank you everybody for being here to this first colloquium that discusses the issue of gender, women in ritual and secret societies or ritualistic societies, sororities, and so on and so forth. Paul also forgot to mention that I went to the University of Pennsylvania, a Quaker university, so I feel like back at home here, thinking about Benjamin Franklin and William Penn, all those. But thank you, Paul, for being a mentor, and thank you all the speakers today for being here. And as you know, gender, sexuality, immigration, and race are issues which are high on the United States political agenda and in the world's agenda. Also, they are controversial issues in North American fraternalism and in particularly in Freemasonry. We all know the debates, and we have some excerpts, for example, on Prince Hall Freemasonry and all the controversy around that. And to sustain an argument that fraternal groups contribute to democratization, as some of us have argued before, and some other scholars such as Margaret Jacob, it would seem that at least some case would have to be made for their contributions to progress in the movement towards racial, gender, and sexual equality. After all, most fraternal ritual proclaims ideals of universal brotherhood, but sometimes not sisterhood. Yet, as we'll be seeing, the evidence is hardly conclusive that human rights, in their practical sense of sitting next to a woman, an African American, or a not heterosexual individual, have permeated the American lodge room. The purpose of my talk this morning is to open a discussion for this colloquium that we titled Not Men Only, Sisters, Sororities, and Ritualistic Societies, and also we pay special attention to the 200th anniversary of the birth of Rob Morris, and someone will discuss later today, to pose some questions on the current state of gender, sexuality, in Freemasonry, as well as immigration. We have a speaker who will talk about immigration, Italian immigration to the United States. We aim to shed light on this neglected topic and contribute to the growing and much needed discussion within the Freemasonic and ritualistic organizations scholarship. Because in other subjects, there is a very advanced discussion, but in some areas, particularly in those that in this case, as a scholar, is so dear to my scholar heart, such as Freemasonry. I wrote my undergraduate senior thesis in 1994 on the Freemasons back in Mexico, and it is so important to bring this to the discussion table. And also, when I talk about, if I mention the word Freemasonry, I mention about, I should use it in plural, Freemasonries, because as you know, it's very diverse. And I'm sometimes not focusing on the institution of Freemasonry per se, but particularly in some practices of some lodges within particularly the United States of North America, not with the institution and the rituals and so on and so forth. That's something very important that I'm focusing particularly on the practices, on the views of individuals that but also that they are the decision makers in some of these Masonic groups. It is a great pleasure to have all these amazing speakers here today, and because they have done research that very few have done in the area. And today I argue that the discourses on tradition, masculinity, and antiquity have kept women, ethnic minorities, immigrants, and members of the LGBT community outside the lodge room. Since today, we are all putting special attention on the role of women and gender in ritualistic organizations. I will not stop today to talk about the racial part. Maybe in the future we can discuss that. But I will focus, and we will focus on the role of women in Freemasonry, other co-Masonic organizations, and how they have kept outside the Masonic mainstream along with other sexual minorities. Gender trouble reinforcing masculinity. Those are key topics that make us think about what has happened in all the controversy that surrounds the contributions of Freemasonry to the efforts to end gender and sexual bias. One time, I interviewed a Freemason here in the United States, and I asked him, "What is your opinion about women becoming Freemasons, not in Masonic institutions?" And he said, "quote unquote, that would be the end of Freemasonry." And actually, not from far from here. And I was really puzzled about the answer. That is why we wanted to continue this discussion, and that is why we created this colloquium, that we will hope to continue the discussion also in the future. As you might remember, in the 90s, an author named Robert Bly published a book, Iron John, that proposed to reinforce masculinity through ritual. We all know that he was proposing that, and I quote, "We have defective mythologies that ignore masculine depth of feeling, assign men a place in the sky instead of earth, teach obedience to the wrong powers, work to keep men, boys, and entangle both men and women in systems of industrial domination that exclude both matriarchy and patriarchy." End of quote. Bly aims to rescue or get back some values and privileges that men have lost over the years due to gender and sexual revolution. And I must edit that men think they lost. His argument has been used by some men who not only share his idea, but they try to dismantle some ground that has been gained thanks to the different human rights movements. During the new century, with all the accomplishments that civil rights, and I'm referring to the 21st century, women and LGBTQ movements have accomplished, there has been a backlash, thinking that the fact that some members of society finally have gotten the privileges that they deserve as first-class citizens, those who already have that privilege in the past wrongly assume that they are losing them. So there is this fear, what Ed Sidwin calls this category crisis, of that the abject subject, as Judith Butler points out, will take over your privileges. Masonries, if not the ultimate male initiation rite, is among the oldest fraternal organizations. But not everyone would agree that the world needs most is the continuance of ceremonies to bolster the male ego. That was certainly one of the lodge's functions in the 19th century in the United States, at a time when, and I quote, "men devised experience that helped transform the impulsive passions of the boy into the powerful energies of the man," end of quote. Mary Ingham, in her book, Men, the Male Myth Exposed, argues that the male search for initiation, and I quote, "stems largely from insecurity, the need to try and prove that they are male and that they are strong because they lack the inner ego strength to feel it," end of quote. As far as Ingham is concerned, the end result is to, and I quote, "add another layer of insensitivity," end of quote. In her view, one of the most hopeful signs of the times is a father's recent description of holding his child for the first time, and it felt fantastic, the closest to being female, end of quote. She adds that men, and I quote, "have got shattered the myth of masculinity which stifles their expression of their real needs," end of quote. It would be surprising that the Masons hope that some of the male initiation interests will add members to their rank, and that Masons and feminists would disagree about Bly and about the usefulness of male ritualism. The current clamor over male rituals assumes as virtues without discussion certain supposedly masculine traits. Nevertheless, male initiation and bonding has replaced the New Age emphasis in the 1970s and 1980s on male liberationism, emphasizing freedom for masculine roles. Instead of seeking to explore behavior formerly associated with women, American men since the 90s have been urged to enhance their maleness. There is a fear of losing the so-called white male privilege. Professor Hal Foster has described this development as, and I quote, celebration of the masochist man, and relates it to the growth of the, and I quote, the cult of abjection, end of quote, with an oscillation between sensitivity and sadism, adding, and I quote, God save the women who gets caught in between, end of quote. The revival of an interest in male ritualism gives hopes to those Masons who see the movement as an exclusive male one. Although there are Masonic auxiliaries that admit women, as all of you know here, the Masons have been resolute in keeping women out of the lodge. In this respect, Carnes points out that, and I quote, the ritual of the Masons and other orders completely dominated lodge meetings, and they were focused in great measure of men's feelings about women. In particular, these rites dwelt implicitly on men's discomfort with their female-dominated upbringing and expressed the wish for an all-male family, a wish that was fulfilled both in the outcome of the ritual and in the fact of the lodge membership, end of quote. But the rituals are subject to varying interpretations, which Carnes makes clear. And I quote, an examination of fraternal literature suggests how difficult it was for men to break away from their mothers and to renounce their restricted gender role associated with female domesticity. Poems, guidebooks, and novels consistently endorsed maternal nurture and criticized wives, even though one purpose of such publications was to mitigate wives' opposition to the order. Fraternal ritualists and writers confirmed that maternal attachment had left a deep and enduring emotional imprint, end of quote. Consequently, this strategy contributed to reaffirm maleness within Masonic walls, making Freemasonry an organization in which masculinity is one of the most important characteristics per excellence. Masculinity and maleness have permeated the rituals and the ways in which Masons interact with each other in a socially exclusive male space and male world in which women do not participate. The extraordinary work done by William D. Moore on the Masonic lodge rooms shows the role that masculinity plays on Masonic spaces. The lodge room, according to Moore, became then an important space that preserved masculinity along with other important values that were at risk outside that room. Thus, in the Masonic imaginary, the need to protect such space became an important value that any Mason had to practice. The discourses of tradition and masculinity within the lodge room have developed the idea that Freemasonry is a male institution among Masons in the United States. However, there is the gender issue. Therefore, there is a generally held opinion that Freemasonry is, as I mentioned, a male institution, but is historically untrue, as many of you have argued before. Those who claim that intense irritation of some Masons that women were involved in the very beginning of Freemasonry. For example, in the records of the Lodge of Mary's Chapel in Edinburgh, dated 1688, the lodge was actually presided over by a dame or a mistress. The records of the Grand Lodge of York in 1693 speak about male and female initiates. By the 18th century, the anecdotes about women Masons take on a different note. Aristocratic women now are interlopers who become Masons by accident and are made members to protect the secrets. A woman who found out the secrets by spying was initiated in the lodge in the English town of Barking in 1714. Another woman who eavesdropped on a lodge ceremony, the Honorable Mrs. Elizabeth Alworth, the daughter of the first Viscount Donegal, was initiated in 1712 when she was discovered, and the fact is recorded in her tombstone. Professor Jacob, Margaret Jacob, Professor Cecile Reborget, who is here, Janet Burks, among other scholars, have shown that women played a key role in several important enclaves of the 18th century French high society, including the salons and the loge d'adaptation. According to the research, such lodges were created as early as 1744 under the tutelage of male lodges. And the purpose of these lodges was to welcome women of the aristocracy who, like Madame Lamballe, were already attending Masonic events. There are a number of other women in the 18th century who overheard Masonic secrets, hiding in closets and cupboards, and when discovered were initiated. One of them, of the Newcastle upon Tyne in England, actually later advertised her willingness to tell the secrets to anyone for a price. Nor were female Freemasons confined to Europe. In Canada, in 1783, a woman who eavesdropped was initiated in 1783, buried under a tombstone with Masonic symbols, and claimed as an ancestor by the later Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of the New Brunswick in 1954. In Latin America, also we have examples, and as you know, the French tradition and the French Grand Orient lodges that came to Latin America do accept women, as well as in Spain, in the lodges. In addition to these interesting incidents that I mentioned of women in the late Middle Ages becoming Masons, or women being initiated after the rousted out of grandfather's cloaks, there have long been actual Masonic organizations involving women. They are internal in scope and their role, as well indeed of the place of women in what have regarded as men's secret societies. This needs more examination, and we need to revise the idea that ritualistic societies equal only men members. The better-known women's group with Masonic connections include the Order of the Eastern Star, the Rainbow Girls, and the Amaranth. For example, the Amaranth celebrated their 120th anniversary last year. Besides the relatively long tradition, only a tiny percentage of people have heard of the Amaranth previously. If I ask any of my colleagues, they know about the Freemasons, and they think, they learn, some of those, when they see the Masonic temples, and when they read the Da Vinci Code, or watch the Lost Symbol, but they don't know much about some of these Masonic, the co-Masonic groups or female ritualistic societies. The most famous women's group with Masonic connections in the United States, as you know, is the Order of the Eastern Star. But there are many more. Women have not been welcomed in American lodges, but a number of what is called quasi-Masonic societies like the Rainbow and the Amaranth are part of the Masonic family or conglomerate. And they are welcomed by the Freemasons, but they are not considered Freemasons. They are co-Masonic groups. The argument over the origins and legitimacy of these groups have been going on for centuries, and they relate to the problem of how history is used shamelessly for suspect motives by politicians, ecclesiastics, and just about anyone with a cause. Those who are the winners write the history, but the vision of the vanquished is usually repressed. Those that history is used selectively when it comes to the role of women in Masonry should not be surprising. Masonic historiography is not exempt from the prejudices displayed by historians in general. Indeed, it suffers from all the problems in extenso. But as we will see today, and I'm very happy, historians and other scholars today will illuminate us in the participation of women in the lodge room. Masonry in the United States can hardly be described as supportive of women in their society. However, in the last few years, there has been an attempt to a racial and gender comprehensive integration within the lodge, or at least opening the discussion. We have also, for example, we have learned in our visits to Paris, and I invite everybody to our next conference in Paris, that in some lodges in Paris, they have discussed the issue of trans people to be part of the lodge. And they have come with very reasonable and and acceptable solutions. And they are still standing. Nothing has happened. And they are very successful. And actually, they are growing in terms of membership for respecting other individuals. And I don't mean that there is a disrespectful in the one-on-one basis, but the idea as a whole. This attempt has not been completely successful, but progress has been made. In the case of women, even though it has not become a major debate yet, some discussion and debates have taken place to explore the role of women in American Freemasonry, and we need to invite scholars of Freemasonry in general, not those that we have here, so maybe in the future, to have roundtables about this debate, of course, with evidence and supportive documentation. Nevertheless, it is in the area of gender expression and sexual orientation in which Freemasonry has remained silent. My research has shown that sexuality is not an area open to discussion in American Freemasonry. And we had a recent controversy in Grand Lodges in the South when same-sex marriage was approved in the United States. There was a big controversy because those LGBTQ members, particularly members of the LGBT community who were out, were expelled from some of the lodges. We compare this silence with the military policy that until recently was in effect the don't ask, don't tell. The average member of the lodge in the United States is a white heterosexual male. Of course, there are also lodges that welcome members of other ethnic minorities, Hispanics, Asian, African American, who are also heterosexual, and men. But there is no evidence that other sexual or gender expressions are welcome or discussed within the landscape of US Freemasonry. We do not aim, or I do not aim to speak in favor or against such attitude. I would like to begin, and we all would like to begin, with an invitation to other scholars and perhaps members of the lodge to bring to light issues of gender and sexuality within Freemasonry, not only in the United States, but also in Latin America, Europe, Asia. The discussion of same-sex marriage in the United States is now a reality that has gained positive outcomes. Thus, sooner or later, members of the lodge will want to bring their husbands to the social events organized by the lodge as a first-class citizens who pay taxes and pay dues in their lodges. The argument as to why women have not been included and why the sexual orientation of some members has remained silent are not the only points of this brief description of the situation. Often the popularity of associations such as Freemasonry depended more on a love of ritual and secrecy than anything else. But it also raised the question of their exclusion of ethnic and sexual minorities. How does that assist democracy? The Masons have received rather rough treatment perhaps in my presentation today. But I mean, what happened in the 18th century, 19th century, in which some of the Freemasons really further democracy and civil society, right now in the post-civil rights movements, we would like to see more of that, of what we saw, what Margaret Jacob discussed in her Living the Enlightenment about the role of Freemasonry. So I would like to conclude today that the great altruism that the Masons boast about is amazing, and the role in charity in society is very important, and it needs to continue to happen. But also, in terms of scholarship and practice, we need to see discussion on gender and sexuality among Masonic scholars and among Freemasons. Thank you very much.